انتوا بتسمعونا على STR The Sandy Times Radio. ثقافة، ميوزك وأكثر.
Hello guys, you're listening to the podcast series Community Working Out. In this episode, we move from why community matters to what it actually gives us. We talk about the benefits of running, cycling and training together, how groups create discipline, build confidence and turn effort into momentum. About collective achievement, shared rhythm and why doing hard things together makes progress feel lighter, steadier and more sustainable, both in sport and in life. And I'm your host, Sophia Brontwine, the founder of the Sandy Times. For a long time, I stayed away from group rides. I told myself it was about preference, that I liked training alone, that I was disciplined, structured, focused. In reality, it was fear. I was intimidated by the community, by the packs, by the unspoken assumption that everyone else knew what they were doing, while I was still learning. I was sure I wasn't strong enough, fast enough, experienced enough, that someone would notice my weaknesses before I even had time to explain myself. So I trained alone, intervals before sunrise, head down, numbers on the screen, no witnesses. It felt controlled, safe, contained. If I failed, no one saw it. If I struggled, it stayed private. And for a while, it worked. My fitness improved, my discipline sharpened, but something was missing, even if I didn't want to admit it yet. The first time I joined a group ride, nothing dramatic happened. No one judged me. No one tested me. No one cared how strong I was. People just rode, some faster, some slower, everyone struggling in their own quiet way. And that's when I realized how wrong my assumptions had been. The community didn't demand performance. It offered support. It didn't make me smaller, it made me braver. Riding with others didn't replace my discipline. It softened it. It made hard days easier. It gave momentum to days when motivation was thin. It normalized effort instead of isolating it. And over time, I found myself changing roles. From the person hiding at the back to the one inviting others in, encouraging beginners, convincing friends to try their first long ride, asking people to climb mountains with me, not because it's easy, but because it's shared. Now my training life has balance. I still do my hard interval sessions alone, I still need silence, focus and structure. But a few times a week I choose the group, an easy social spin, a long mountain ride, coffee after. That combination made me stronger physically, steadier mentally, and more connected emotionally. And it taught me something simple but important. Community doesn't weaken ambition, it sustains it. Chapter 1. The science of moving together, or why groups make us stronger. We like to believe discipline is individual, that consistency comes from willpower, grit, personality. But the human nervous system doesn't work that way. We regulate better in connection, always have. When we move together, our bodies don't just share space, they synchronize. Breathing patterns align, effort evens out, stress responses soften. The brain receives a clear signal: you are not alone in this. That's why group training feels different from solo effort. It's not just psychological encouragement, it's physiological regulation. When movement happens alongside others, cortisol levels drop faster, oxytocin increases, and the nervous system exits fight or flight more efficiently. This is what researchers describe as co-regulation, the process by which humans stabilize each other through proximity, rhythm, and shared activity. In a city like Dubai, this matters more than we admit. Many people arrive here without social roots. Careers accelerate faster than relationships. Productivity is rewarded, rest is negotiated. Group training becomes an anchor, a predictable embodied ritual that cuts through the noise. You don't have to explain yourself. You don't have to impress anyone. You just show up, and that is enough. Over time, this consistency compounds. HRV improves, sleep stabilizes, stress responses soften. But more importantly, confidence grows quietly. Not the loud kind, the calm kind that comes from knowing you can show up even when things feel heavy. Community training doesn't remove struggle, it distributes it. And that distribution is what makes resilience sustainable. Devika Mankani, psychologist at the 100 Wellness Center, explains it clearly.
Humans, we regulate best in connection. So group workouts combine the ingredients of movement, rhythm, and belonging. So when we exercise along others, the nervous system co-regulates. We literally tune in to the energy of the group, which lowers cortisol, increases oxytocin, which is a hormone that supports trust, bonding, and emotional safety.
Oxytocin is not just a bonding hormone. It directly counteracts stress hormones. Lower cortisol means better recovery, improved sleep, and more stable mood. This is why people often report feeling calmer, not just fitter, after group workouts. For experts especially, this effect is amplified. Devika continues.
For expats, especially relocation can disrupt social networks, and it can create a sort of hidden, latent loneliness. And I see this, how group workouts can create a sense of tribe. It's a place where they can be seen and feel welcomed and supported. And the social buffering effect, which has been well documented, it occurs when people are then feeling connected, they cope better with stress then, and they recover faster from challenges, and they can build stronger and build more emotional resilience.
This social buffering effect is a real studied phenomenon. When people feel connected, their bodies respond differently to stress. Recovery improves, emotional resilience increases. The system works better, not because the workout is harder, but because the environment is safer. And the benefits aren't just psychological. Dr. Sladana Pavlovich, internal medicine specialist at Health Bay, adds the physiological layer.
Regular group training, whether it's running, cycling, or boot camps, has a great impact on our biological age. You're combining physical activity, social connection, and a consistent routine, which lowers chronic inflammation, stabilizes metabolic health, and improves HRV quite quickly.
HRV, heart rate variability, is one of the most sensitive markers of recovery and nervous system balance. And as Dr. Pavlovich explains, it's often the first thing to improve when people move consistently in community.
HRV is usually the first marker to change because the autonomic nervous system responds immediately to movement, community, and rhythm. Inflammatory markers take weeks and metabolic markers take even longer, but overall, people who train consistently in a group stay healthier for longer, physically and mentally.
In other words, discipline loves company, because the body does too. Chapter 2. Discipline, routine, and the quiet power of showing up together. One of the biggest myths around training is that discipline is something you either have or you don't, that it's a personality trait, that some people are simply wired to wake up early, suffer willingly, and repeat it again the next day. In reality, discipline is rarely born in isolation. It's learned, borrowed, reinforced, and most importantly, externalized. When you train alone, discipline becomes a daily internal negotiation. Every alarm clock is a debate. Every tired morning is a courtroom where motivation argues with fatigue. You ask yourself whether today really matters, whether skipping one session will make a difference, whether rest is self-care or avoidance. And most of the time, the tired voice is persuasive. Groups remove that internal debate almost entirely. When you know someone is waiting, you don't ask whether you feel like it. You ask how quickly you can get dressed. The decision has already been made, not by force, but by commitment. And that commitment doesn't feel heavy, it feels relational. This is where discipline quietly transforms from punishment into structure. There is something deeply regulating about repeated shared routines. Same place, same time, same faces. The nervous system loves predictability. The brain stops scanning for threat when it knows what's coming next. Over time, training becomes part of the architecture of your life, rather than an extra task you have to squeeze in. This is especially powerful in Dubai, where everything else feels negotiable. Work hours blur, social plans shift, priorities rearrange themselves weekly. Community workouts become one of the few non-negotiable points in the calendar. Not because they are enforced, but because they are shared. And once something becomes non-negotiable, it starts shaping identity. You stop saying, I'm trying to train more. You stop saying, I should work out. You start saying, I train on those days. That language shift matters more than it seems. Identity-based habits are more resilient than goal-based ones. Goals expire. Identity persists. Over time, discipline stops being something you exert and starts being something you inhabit. Morning group workouts are particularly powerful in this regard. They create a psychological clean slate before the day has a chance to fragment you. You've already done something hard. You've already shown up. You've already kept a promise, not just to yourself, but to others. That changes how the rest of the day feels. You move through work with a quiet sense of completion. Stresses feel smaller. Decisions feel steadier. Not because workout solved anything, but because your nervous system has already experienced effort, completion, and connection. This is why people who train in communities often describe feeling more grounded, even when life remains chaotic. The body has already anchored itself early in the day. And this is also why discipline inside community doesn't feel like a pressure. When discipline is rational, it's gentler. You're not forcing yourself, you're responding to something you're part of. That subtle difference is what makes consistency sustainable over months and years, not just during bursts of motivation. What's interesting is how this spills beyond sport. People who train together often start synchronizing other habits. Sleep improves because morning matters. Alcohol intake changes because recovery affects the group right. Even work boundaries shift. People protect their evenings and mornings more carefully because those routines have meaning now. Discipline, in this sense, becomes contagious. You don't need to be the most motivated person in the group. You just need to keep showing up. And eventually, the rhythm carries you. This is the quiet power of routine in community. It doesn't demand transformation. It creates conditions where transformation becomes almost inevitable. This is something Asma Hilal Luta, founder of the 100 Wellness, speaks about not as a theory, but as lived experience.
You perform better and you start the day with a sense of accomplishment. The discipline comes from the decision itself, like waking up, getting dressed, going out to run takes willpower. And every time you make that choice, you strengthen your mental resilience. Over time, those choices shape your identity. You begin to see yourself as someone who shows up, someone who's resilient, someone committed to growth even when it's hard.
What's powerful here is that discipline stops being punitive. It becomes relational. You don't train because you must. You train because you belong. This identity shift is critical. Once training is embedded in who you are, not what you force yourself to do. Consistency stops draining willpower. It becomes default. And that default is what creates long-term change, physically, mentally, emotionally. Chapter 3. Why training together feels easier, even when it's harder. One of the strangest things about training in a group is that it often feels easier, even when it's objectively harder. You ride longer, climb more, push slightly beyond what you planned, and yet you finish thinking, that wasn't so bad. If you did the exact same session alone, the experience would feel completely different. This isn't because group training magically makes effort disappear. It's because it changes how the brain interprets effort. When you train alone, attention collapses inward. Every sensation gets amplified. Heart rate feels louder. Fatigue feels personal. The brain starts narrating the experience. This is hard. This is uncomfortable. Why am I doing this? That internal monologue is exhausting in itself, often more draining than the physical work. In a group, attention shifts outward. You are aware of pace, rhythm, the sound of wheels, footsteps, breathing around you. Conversation fills the gaps between discomfort. Even silence feels shared. The brain stops catastrophizing effort because it's no longer the only thing in the room. Neuroscience describes this as attentional diffusion. When attention is distributed across social and environmental cues, perceived exertion drops. Even when physical output stays the same or increases, this is why athletes often perform better in races than in solo time trials. The presence of others changes perception before it changes physiology. This effect is especially noticeable in endurance sports, where discomfort isn't acute but cumulative. Fatigue doesn't arrive suddenly, it creeps in. And when you're alone, you notice every step of that process. In a group, fatigue still arrives, but it doesn't dominate the experience. Confidence grows here, almost accidentally. Not the loud, performative confidence of posting results or chasing validation, but the quiet kind that comes from repeated evidence. You ride a distance you once thought was out of reach. You finish a climb you assumed you'd have to stop on. You keep up longer than expected. And because it happens without drama, it sinks deeper. This is how belief rewires. Psychologists call this self-efficacy, the belief that you can handle future challenges based on past experiences. Group training accelerates self-efficacy because success feels shared, rather than earned through suffering alone. You don't think, I survived this. You think, we did this. That subtle shift matters. It removes the isolation from effort. It makes challenge feel approachable instead of threatening. Another underrated benefit of group training is how it changes our relationship with comparison. When we train alone, comparison is abstract. Numbers, targets, expectations. In groups, comparison becomes human. You see different bodies, different strengths, different limits. Some people climb better, some recover faster, some struggle quietly, and that diversity normalizes variability. You stop seeing performance as a ranking and start seeing it as a spectrum. This is particularly important for people who arrive in sport later in life, or who are rebuilding confidence after injury, burnt out, or long breaks. Community training creates an environment where progress is visible but not weaponized. Improvement becomes something you witness, not something you are constantly measuring. Enjoyment also plays a larger role than we tend to admit. We often treat enjoyment as secondary, something nice to have if goals are met. But enjoyment is one of the strongest predictors of long-term adherence in physical activity. If training feels grim, even discipline eventually breaks down. If it feels meaningful, people stay. Groups inject meaning through shared experience. Post-ride coffee, jokes halfway through suffering, that silent acknowledgement at the top of the climb where everyone knows exactly how hard it was to get there. This moment don't improve VO2 max, but they improve commitment. And commitment is what keeps people in sport long enough to actually get fitter. There is also a subtle emotional regulation happening here. Shared effort validates struggle. You don't have to explain why something was hard, everyone felt it. That validation reduces self-criticism and increases emotional resilience. You stop framing difficulty as failure and start seeing it as part of the process. Over time, this reframes how people approach challenge outside of sport as well. Work stress feels more manageable. Hard conversations feel less threatening. You've practiced being uncomfortable with weaknesses and survived. This is why group training doesn't just change how strong you are. It changes how capable you believe yourself to be. And belief, once established, travels far beyond the bike, the track, or the gym. Angus Maxfield, co-founder of Jumeirah Jones Running Club, describes this effect simply.
I think that we were there at quite a good time. I think that at the time where we started, there was a definite need for like a social fitness community, and we seemed to fill that gap. And there were lots of people who were either focused on performance or who were focused on training and getting better, but no one really treated fitness as just something fun that you do on a daily basis. And luckily, when we formed, it seemed to resonate with a lot of people. So we became the kind of go-to for the social fitness scene. And, people grew friendships out of it and were able to exercise regularly without any real expectation. And I think that because there was no expectation, it became a lot more friendly and a lot more accessible. And therefore, it grew to quite a successful amount of people, which is nice. Two years later, 2 years down the line, we're at quite a good space. Yeah, I mean, it's just distraction. That's pure and simply what it is. You can talk to people, you can even just be alongside people. There's probably a few psychological factors which mean that if you're running alongside someone, you want to run at the same pace as them or maintain it or go for equally as long as them. So all of those factors combined. But for me specifically, I would say it's just the enjoyment factor. If you can chat to someone, catch up with someone while you're running, then you're killing two birds with one stone, quite simply, and you're also having a laugh as well. So I'd much prefer to do most of my long runs with people alongside me, just to distract me from, wanting to stop or having that accountability factor too. So probably distraction, enjoyment, and accountability being the three things.
This isn't distraction, it's regulation. When effort is shared, perception of difficulty drops. Studies on perceived exertion show that social environments reduce the brain's threat response during endurance activities, even when physical output increases. That sense of together changes how pain is interpreted. It becomes part of the experience, not a signal to stop. And that's why group training quietly builds confidence. You don't just get fitter, you recalibrate what you believe you are capable of. Chapter 4: Ambition, Balance, and the Role of Pause. At some point, ambition needs a counterweight. In cities like Dubai, ambition is ambient. It's in the air, in conversations, in calendars packed weeks ahead. We are constantly encouraged to optimize our work, our bodies, our routines. Even sport can quietly slip into that same logic. More volume, more structure, more output, better results. Community training has the potential to either amplify that pressure or soften it. The difference lies in intention. When ambition goes unchecked, training becomes transactional. Sessions are judged solely by numbers. Rest becomes suspicious. Enjoyment feels indulgent. The body turns into a project that is never quite finished. This is where community can intervene, not by lowering standards, but by broadening the definition of success. Training with others exposes us to different rhythms of effort. Some people push hard, some people take it easy, some show up tired, some show up flying. And all of it is visible, normalized, accepted. The group becomes a mirror that reflects variability instead of perfection. That variability is not a weakness, it's information. It reminds us that progress is not linear, that bodies fluctuate, that strength includes knowing when to slow down, and that rest is not the opposite of discipline, but part of it. Sophia and Sarah Faisal, founders of Pause Club, speak openly about this tension.
Dubai is a city that's built on ambition. And I think naturally all of us living here tend to get into that mindset as well. And productivity becomes kind of how you measure your worth, of how productive you are. Am I doing enough to progress in my life? And where we come in is trying to make people understand that taking a pause is not unproductive. It's actually getting you to reconnect with yourself and making sure that you're filling your own cup rather than just kind of following the rat race and doing things mindlessly.
One of the most powerful things about group training is that it creates permission. Permission to pause without guilt. Permission to adapt without explanation. Permission to say, today I'm not at my best and still belong. In individual training, pauses often feel like failure. In community, pauses feel like care. This matters deeply for longevity, not just in sport, but in life. Burnout really comes from a single hard session. It comes from prolonged pressure without relief, from constantly overriding signals instead of listening to them, from turning everything into a performance. Community, when done well, interrupts that pattern. It reminds us that effort can be shared, that intensity can coexist with softness, that ambition doesn't have to be isolating. This is also where community training quietly reshapes identity again. You stop seeing yourself as someone who must always push. You start seeing yourself as someone who can choose when to go hard, when to recover, when to lead, when to sit in the middle of the pack. That flexibility is a form of maturity. Over time, training becomes less about proving something and more about sustaining something. A body, a routine, a relationship with effort that doesn't collapse under pressure. And that, ultimately, is what makes community training so powerful. It doesn't just help you perform better, it helps you stay in the game. Training together doesn't erase individuality, it doesn't flatten ambition, it doesn't replace structure or personal goals. What it does is make effort human. It distributes weight, it shares momentum, it reminds us that we don't have to carry everything alone. We still train solo when focus is needed. We still chase personal benchmarks. But when we move together, discipline becomes lighter, confidence becomes steadier and progress feels more sustainable. In a city that constantly asks for more, community training becomes a quiet form of self-respect. Not dramatic, not performative, just consistent. And this is community working out. In the next episode, we shift the focus to women in endurance sports, training cycles, strengths, vulnerability, and the power of female communities. We'll talk about what it means to embrace ambition without apology, to support each other through effort and rest, and to build spaces where women don't just participate, they lead. Thank you guys for listening to the new podcast episode, Community Working Out. It is me, Sofia Brondwine, the founder of the Sandy Times, and I hope to see you next week.